Ark of the Covenant was sacred. It contained God's 10 commandments.
The Ark was the most significant object that has ever existed on the face of the earth.
The Bible tells of its extreme power.
Fiery sparks would emerge.
People would die if they touched it.
God made his power manifest through the Ark.
It was his throne on earth.
Yet the Ark has been lost for over 2,500 years. Gone, but not forgotten.
The Ark exists today. It is somewhere.
Where is it now? That's the million-dollar question.
Over the ages, men have hunted for the Ark in Egypt, in the Arabian desert, or even in Ethiopia.
It's like looking for a needle in the haystack.
But one man claimed to have found it in Jerusalem.
He pointed out where he believed it was.
Was he a charlatan, or as he believed, an instrument of God?
God led us right to it.
Ron Wyatt said he saw the Ark of the Covenant with his own eyes and lived to tell the tale. Ron Wyatt was from Kentucky, a poor but God-fearing state in America's Bible Belt.
He came from a very large family that lived in rural Kentucky in the mountains. Much poverty, not much of a chance in life. He had to leave home when he was either 12 or 13.
What Ron knew of the ancient Middle East came from reading the Bible. He was drawn to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a devout Christian sect where Bible study is a lifetime pursuit. A habit he instilled in his own children, a daughter and 2 sons. Michelle is the eldest and attends this Seventh-day Adventist church near Nashville every Sabbath.
Dad was raised that way his whole life, and we were our entire lives also.
His youngest son was named after him, Ron Wyatt Jr.
We were raised Seventh-day Adventists, fairly strict. I mean, you know, we had to go to church, had to go to Sabbath school.
Seventh-day Adventists believe that the Bible is the Word of God and historically accurate.
You have your Bible class, so you go through there and you study all the different stories in there about David and Moses.
There was something else you saw out there about what Jesus gave to us, and that is the little stars.
At home, every evening we had worship. So we had Bible books, like children's story books, and Dad would read us a story every night. So we got to take turns sitting on his lap while he held the book and read the book. So we were raised our whole lives to believe all of that's true.
So we were always raised up knowing the Bible, no doubt that it's the truth. That's, to us, it was fact.
Ron Wyatt worked in a Tennessee hospital as a nurse anesthetist, but age 44, he made a life-changing decision to prove that the stories of the Bible are true. Loaded up with equipment, including an 8mm cine camera, Ron and his 2 sons, Danny and Ronnie, set off for the foothills of Mount Ararat in Turkey, looking for Noah's Ark. And in a boat-shaped rocky outcrop, they thought they'd found it.
My dad was quite sure that that was Noah's Ark because there's the only boat-shaped object way up in a mountain range in Turkey.
Right here is a piece of Noah's Ark. It's petrified wood, and we found this right up on top of the boat-shaped object.
The next Bible story Ron Wyatt decided to prove true was the parting of the Red Sea. So in 1978, after sub-aqua training in a Nashville swimming pool, Ron and the boys went diving in the Red Sea. They were searching for Egyptian chariot parts to prove Pharaoh's army pursuing Moses and the Israelites had been swallowed up as the parted Red Sea collapsed. The Wyatts were inexperienced in both diving and archaeology, but as soon as they started searching, they found what they were looking for.
Me and my brother saw a chariot wheel, and we saw the back of a chariot turned upside down.
And I found a golden chariot wheel. My dad figured later may have been the Pharaoh's chariot. I did take a picture of it, but that camera did drown, unfortunately.
But Ron's apparently successful search in the Red Sea was suddenly interrupted. Ron had severe sunburn and was unable to continue. As he was convalescing, he went sightseeing in Jerusalem with Danny and Ronnie, when something very odd happened. Ron suddenly stopped walking. He raised his arm. His hand pointed to a derelict area. When he spoke, his voice sounded strange.
There is Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant is in there.
I'd never heard him mention Jeremiah's grotto. So that surprised him because he was saying, man, I don't know how I said that or why, but that came out of my mouth.
Ron was convinced that God was speaking to him, guiding him to his greatest discovery of all.
Ron really believed that God was leading him to look for the Ark of the Covenant.
Ron had no idea then that the search for the greatest of all biblical treasures would soon come to dominate his life. But what was the Ark, and why was it so important?
The Ark was the receptacle in which the most important items that ever existed in the world resided, namely the Ten Commandments.
In the Bible, the book of Exodus tells how Moses leads the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and through the wilderness to Mount Sinai.
As the story goes, when Moses went up to Mount Sinai, he stays there 40 days and 40 nights without eating and without drinking, and then he received from God 2 stone tablets, and the 10 Commandments was inscribed with the finger of God. So it was really an object, created by God, something that came as a gift from a supernatural power.
The importance of the Ten Commandments cannot be overstated, not for how they were written, but what was written on them, God's law. They would become the foundation of Western morality. They are instructions of what must be done.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy.
And what must not be done.
Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal.
The commandments were one half of a covenant, a bargain with God. If the people kept his law, he would be their God and deliver them to the promised land.
A covenant is a two-way agreement. Both sides have responsibility. So God took upon himself the responsibility to preserve the Jewish nation.
The Bible says that God commanded Moses to build a container to keep the commandments in. This was the Ark. Reading his Bible, Ron would find a clear description of what it might actually look like.
They shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2 cubits and a half shall be its length, 1 cubit and a half its breadth, and 1 cubit and a half its height.
A cubit is about half a meter. So the ark was 1 meter long, half a meter wide, and half a meter tall. Small, but exquisitely beautiful.
You shall overlay it with pure gold. Inside and outside shall you overlay it, and you shall make on it a molding of gold around it.
Most memorably, God's specification included on the lid of the ark 2 golden statuettes of winged celestial beings, cherubim.
You shall make a mercy seat of pure gold, and you shall make 2 cherubim of gold.
The Bible describes not just a beautiful, grand container for the 10 Commandments. It was so much more. The lid between the 2 golden cherubim was the seat of God Himself.
The cherubim were absolutely remarkable because the presence of God emerged from between the 2 cherubs.
Experience the past like never before with History Hit's award-winning original documentaries and ad-free podcasts with our expert historians like Dan Snow, Susanna Lipscomb, Lucy Worsley, Mary Beard, Tristan Hughes, and myself, Matt Lewis. Sign up for an exclusive discount using the link in the description and embark on your historical journey from the wonders of ancient Egypt and the life of Anne Boleyn to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the discovery of Shackleton's Endurance. Get history wherever, whenever, exclusively on History Hit.
And this is the most important part of all. Legend has it that the ark was a dwelling place for God on earth, dispensing wisdom and unlimited power.
And this was where His presence came down and dwelt. It was His throne on earth. People would die if they touched it because of the glory of God that no human can survive.
As the ark was being carried towards Jerusalem, a man by the name of Uzzah wished to steady it, and because he touched the ark, he dropped down dead.
The ark was described as being an object of immense power. And we get depictions such as in the Indiana Jones movie, where uncovering it unleashed this unspeakable power.
Such was the power of the ark that the Israelites carried it on poles before their advancing army.
The Bible tells us about the usage of the ark. The ark was taken into battle as a symbol of the power of God and the fact that God would be with them as they fought.
But it was not just a weapon. The Bible tells how the ark eased the Israelites' path to the Promised Land.
We're told how the ark was carried through the waters of the River Jordan as the nation was entering into the Holy Land. And thanks to the presence of the ark, miraculously, the nation was able to walk on dry land. It's not the ark that has the power, but rather it's the power of God which is manifest through the ark.
Around 3,000 years ago, the ark found a permanent home when King David at last settled the Israelites in Jerusalem. The Bible says David's son, King Solomon, built a great temple on a hill. The ark was to take its permanent place in Jewish ritual deep inside, in a place called the Holy of Holies.
Once a year, on the holy day of Yom Kippurim, the Day of Atonement, the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies. That was the only day of the year in which he would enter into the holiest place on earth in order to pray alongside the ark.
It's one of the world's great mysteries that this most holy object not only disappeared from view, but vanished altogether.
When Solomon builds the temple, we know where it went, in the Holy of Holies, in the back room of the temple. But at some point, the Bible stops talking about the ark.
What happened to it, and where is it now? These two questions have obsessed countless generations. There have been many stories over the centuries about what happened to the Ark. Adventurers have hunted as far afield as Egypt and Africa, yet it has never been found. The most popular theory is that the Ark was lost in Jerusalem itself, in a cataclysmic invasion.
The destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in the early part of the 6th century BC is described in the Bible. It's described in the records of the Babylonians and by archaeology.
Ron Wyatt learned that after Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians in 586 BC, nothing more is heard of the Ark. Did the Babylonians take it or destroy it? If they had, surely there would be a historical record of it. They would have boasted about it. The Jews would have lamented it, chronicled it. So if the Babylonians didn't take it away or destroy it, what did happen to it? Ron decided the clue lay in his involuntary words. But who was Jeremiah?
Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah from the village of Anatot, was one of the three great prophets of our people, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And he had the tragic responsibility for preparing the people for the destruction of the temple.
Jeremiah was a priest in Solomon's temple, and his duty, having foreseen the danger, was to protect the Ark. Did he have anything to do with its disappearance?
There is one source, the book of 2nd Maccabees, that says that Jeremiah took the ark and hid it from the Babylonians before the city was destroyed. Now, this is a book that's not in most editions of the Bible today. It's from what we call the Apocrypha.
The prophet Jeremiah, being warned of God, commanded the tabernacle and the ark to go with him. He found a hollow cave wherein he laid the tabernacle and the ark and the altar of incense, and so stopped the door.
The second book of Maccabees also relates that no sooner had Jeremiah's workers sealed the ark in the cave than they miraculously lost all idea of where it was. The ark was safe from destruction, but lost. So when Ron voiced the words, "There's Jeremiah's grotto," was he actually indicating the location of the cave where the ark was hidden? In January 1979, Ron Wyatt had saved enough of his hospital wages to return to Jerusalem. With his sons, Danny and Ronnie, he began his quest to unearth the Ark of the Covenant. But as their own film footage shows, the area he had pointed to looked very inauspicious. It was a rubbish dump.
When we first started digging, there was a dead cat in there and trash. Me and my dad were the first two in there, and we were digging and a lot of dust.
We're in real soft ash-like stuff. It's just real soft digging down. I got a big cave in on me, and it kind of got me up to about here. I couldn't hardly move. But, you know, my head was out. I could breathe, but it just kind of trapped me there, so they had to dig me out of that.
Ron wasn't one to let a lack of training or experience hamper his quest for the Ark.
We weren't shoring up the cave as we dug it at all. We weren't putting boards over our heads or shoring anything up.
I'd never dug a hole like that before. We were lucky we didn't bury ourselves properly. Yeah, not the smartest thing.
There are things that could have collapsed on us at any time. It was very dangerous.
Although the Wyatts were inexperienced, they were also lucky. No one was injured, but it seemed their luck had run out when they hit a serious problem.
We were digging along the outside, and we broke into the mountain and cleared out a bunch of rock from in there and started digging inside the mountain.
Now, their work stalled. Instead of finding Jeremiah's grotto and the Ark, they faced a wall of solid rock.
Once you get past all the loose dirt, it became rock. And so we were literally busting rock, breaking through rock to get to where we were going. We had 3 or 4 buckets, and we kept filling them up and crawling out the tunnel. You couldn't stand up, so you were crawling on your hands and knees. My knees were bruised, very, very bruised and swollen from crawling in and out of there.
But the Wyatts' biggest obstacle wasn't the injuries the rock caused them, but the time it added to the dig. Unlike the earlier discoveries, this archaeological quest was taking too long. Ron ran out of money, and he and his sons had to return home to the US.
My dad would run out of money and come back home and work and save up, and then we would quit our job or our school and go right back. As soon as he had a ticket, I'm gone, you know.
Yeah, that was his life's mission, pretty much. He'd come back and work, make money, then go back.
We'd quit anything to go do that, because it seemed really important.
When they returned to Jerusalem the next year, 1980, refunded and reinvigorated, they applied themselves to the obstacle between them and Jeremiah's grotto containing the Ark of the Covenant, the wall of solid rock.
Dad prayed usually in the morning, help us, you know, if we can find something.
We were constantly praying throughout this on a daily basis, you know, because we knew we were clueless.
Once more, Ron seemed to experience a guiding hand. He made a comment to his sons that he was impressed in some indefinable way to cut into the solid rock of the cliff face.
Every time we come to a stumbling block, we had to pray, and somehow we'd get around it and move on.
They set to work faithfully chipping at the solid rock of the cliff. Astonishingly, they broke through the rock into an open space. Could it be a cave? But the dig season for 1980 was ending, so Ron and his sons again had to go home to Tennessee and wait. Now, more than ever, Ron believed that when he returned, the Ark would be waiting. But could the Ark even have survived thousands of years buried in a cave? Even if he had discovered Jeremiah's grotto, Ron might find just a handful of dust.
In the case of the Ark of the Covenant, it's been 3,000 years since it was made. Now, we know, for example, that in Egypt, in a very dry environment, that wood can survive. We've got wooden objects from Egypt in many different tombs.
The Bible tells how God specified that the ark be made of acacia wood. Acacia is exceptionally hard and very dense. It will last a long time. In Egypt, acacia panels have been found over 3,000 years old. If Tutankhamun's ark-like chests survive, why not the ark? In January 1982, after 3 years of digging, Ron still prayed that he would discover the ark, excavating in the place God had led him to. But ill health dogged his sons, and he had to send them home.
We had got ill that one time. I had got the flu real bad. Danny got flu. And Danny stayed, I think, for another couple weeks after that, and then he came home.
Even without his sons to help him, Ron wouldn't give up.
He believed so strongly in what he was supposed to do that nothing would stop him.
No, he never gave up. He saw everything through. Even if he almost lost his life, he would regroup and go back again and try it again until he got to where he wanted to be. Yeah, he wasn't afraid.
But now, digging over 20 feet underground, even Ron realized that he couldn't work alone. He enlisted the help of a young local man. Together, they labored in the tunnels he and his sons had worked so hard to open up. One tunnel in particular was very difficult. A narrow passageway leading through a chimney, a tight vertical shaft so small that Ron had to exhale to squeeze through. Inside the tunnel, Ron saw a very small opening in the rock wall. Only Ron's assistant was small enough to wriggle inside. Something about this space seemed to fill him with dread. Gripped by sheer terror, he fled, never to return. Ron believed his assistant must have experienced the power of the Ark. Ron enlarged the opening and squeezed into the confined space. He found himself in a chamber filled with small rocks. He caught glimpses of gold, not the Ark, but ritual objects from the temple. Now he was certain the Ark must be in there somewhere. Crawling painfully over the rocks to the rear of the chamber, Ron saw a partially buried stone case. The lid was so near to the ceiling that he couldn't see inside. Could it contain the Ark? He had to find a way to see inside the stone case. See the Ark. But how? Now, Ron may not have been a professional archaeologist, but he was a professional nurse anesthetist, and now he put his medical knowledge to good use. He wondered whether a medical camera and probe, designed to see inside the human body, would allow him to investigate and identify the contents of the stone case. Alone again in the chamber, Ron pushed the camera into a small hole he drilled in the side of the stone case. And suddenly, there it was. Ron Wyatt was the first person to see the Ark of the Covenant lost for 2,500 years.
He was crying when he told me. He just said he couldn't believe it.
Ron Wyatt announced to the world that he had found the lost Ark of the Covenant, proof to non-believers of the existence of God. But if he thought he'd achieved his aim, Ron was in for a big surprise. The good news was not received with open arms. Professional archaeologists would need convincing evidence. They would want to see what Ron had seen, the Ark of the Covenant.
When it comes to any amateur enthusiast claiming that they found anything to do with the Bible, my first question to them is, show me the data. Show me your evidence.
Skeptics pointed to the fact that Ron Wyatt was alone when he found the Ark. He had no witness.
If you think you found the Ark of the Covenant, show me a picture.
But Ron didn't produce any pictures. He claimed he did have documents and photos, but was not allowed to show them. In a series of talks, he told people that the Israeli Antiquities Authority, the IAA, had made secrecy a condition of his excavating permit.
I'm not allowed to give the exact location, but I will say that the Ark of the Covenant is exactly where I found it. And we have proven that to the Antiquities Department in Israel. They have the proof, and they know it's been found.
But even the existence of a permit is disputed. Dr. Dan Bahat was the IAA district director at the time.
When I was a district archaeologist of Jerusalem, Ron Wyatt was in Jerusalem with his activities. To the best of my knowledge, he never received any permit to dig in Jerusalem.
Ron could have silenced his critics by simply showing them the Ark of the Covenant. Why not just return to the dig with witnesses? But Ron had bad news there too. He said the access tunnel he had made had been sealed by the authorities with reinforced concrete.
The way that you used to get through it through the garden tomb is closed. Can't get through that way anymore.
Ron Wyatt's claim to have discovered the Ark of the Covenant is backed up by no evidence whatsoever in terms of hard data.
Ron could never produce any evidence of the Ark of the Covenant for anyone. And yes, he did try. He did try.
Professional archaeologists openly expressed the opinion that Ron's discoveries were just too good to be true.
So while it takes years, decades, to become properly trained as an archaeologist, where you can read the ancient text, do the excavations, interpret the data and the analysis, it sounds like anybody can go out and try to find them. Now, the archaeologists know that that's like looking for a needle in a haystack, or rather a needle in many haystacks.
Ron was the first to admit he was an amateur. He believed God was responsible for his discoveries.
It's very obvious that I didn't find these on my own intelligence, or of my own intelligence. I don't think there's anybody on earth clever enough to have found all of these, but God knew where they were from day one, and he wanted everybody to see them.
So what was the truth? Lack of evidence begs the question, had Ron Wyatt made it all up?
As a person, he was a very pleasant person, but to this very day, I cannot make up my mind if he was a crook or a naive person. I say crook with reservation because I think maybe he was naive and he believed in what he said.
I had not known Ron to lie, and I knew he was telling the truth.
That was Dad's whole mission, to show the truth. I mean, he didn't take archaeology or anything. That's why archaeologists don't think that he's legitimate, but God uses people, not necessarily professionals, to do his work.
Those who doubt Ron Wyatt point to one fact in particular. He found exactly what he set out to find, down to the last detail. Even after the ravages of 3,000 years, the ark he described was exactly as depicted in a Bible picture book. He produced a drawing of just what it looked like, covered in gold and with a decorated gold rim and 2 gold cherubim on the lid.
It is interesting that what Ron Wyatt says he discovered is the typical or conventional description of the ark. In actuality, if you find the ark, it may look completely different.
There are, in fact, 2 quite different biblical descriptions of the ark. Exodus has the ark constructed by an artist, Bezalel. This is the famous ark, Ron's ark, covered all over with the purest gold, its lid with golden cherubim and a decorated rim of gold. But in another biblical account, not in Exodus, but the book of Deuteronomy, the ark is far simpler. In Deuteronomy, Moses made the ark himself. Just a simple acacia wood box with no decoration at all. This is a much more plausible container for a nomadic desert tribe to make and carry around with them in the wilderness.
This description of the ark certainly lends itself to the belief that it's simply a storage box. And we find in archaeology, in King Tut's tomb and elsewhere, similar boxes.
According to professional archaeologists, Ron made a typical amateur's mistake. He went looking for one specific object to support a preconceived view that every Bible story is historically true. Trained archaeologists approach their subject with a more open mind, looking for any artifacts to help guide them to what the historical story might be, never sure what they might find.
You may be looking for one thing, asking one question, and all of a sudden something else pops up.
This is exactly what has just happened to one eminent archaeologist. Professor Yossi Garfinkel of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's very different from Ron Wyatt, but what he has found may change forever our understanding of the Ark. This is the ancient city of Kirbet Kiafa, above the valley of Elah. Famously, in this valley, about 3,000 years ago, the boy David slew the giant warrior Goliath with a stone from his slingshot. Professor Garfinkel has been digging here for 5 years, looking for neither David, nor Goliath, nor even the Ark of the Covenant.
I'm not trying to prove the Bible. You have the biblical tradition. This is a history which was written by people few thousand years ago. And what we can do as archaeologists is to see what we are finding.
Professor Garfinkel is looking for nothing and everything. As a result, his dig here in the summer of 2011 unearthed a fragmented clue to what the Ark may actually have been.
During the season, there were many fragments of quite interesting stone vessels, but as they were really broken into many pieces, we didn't realize what it was. So it was nicely packed, all these artifacts, and we sent them to the laboratory for conservation.
Highly skilled conservators explored what might be made of all the pieces. Rather like solving a fiendish 3D puzzle without the picture on the box as a guide. What they eventually rebuilt was extraordinary.
And when I came to see, I really didn't believe my eyes. It was a nice box made of stone, something that was never found before in any archaeological site in Israel or in the ancient Near East.
Professor Garfinkel knew little about the stone box at first, but during investigation, it began to tell its story. It seemed to be a model building of some kind.
This artifact is made from one block of stone, which was carved nicely in the shape of a building, and then it was painted red. There are traces of red pigment here. I think that there was a wooden door which was fixed here to the inside, and there were small pegs which fixed the door to its location.
But what exactly was this small model building used for?
Inside you can see a small depression, probably a base where a statue or maybe a symbol of God, a small stone or something was placed. So what is it? The way I understand it, an object like this, where they kept symbols of God inside it, and it was portable and moved from one place to another according to needs. And I understand it as a portable shrine.
Professor Garfinkel's thesis that this was a portable shrine is supported when the little building with doors is compared to the biblical account of the Temple of Solomon, where the Ark came to rest. They are eerily similar.
So this is what we called triple recessed doorway or triple recessed door frame. And this is exactly how the Bible describes Solomon's palace and also the entrances in the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem.
But the box couldn't be a model of the temple. Radiocarbon dating tells us it is older than that. What is much more likely to be true is that the temple was a giant version of a portable shrine like this one. Then, Professor Garfinkel, with extraordinary insight, asked a vital question. What did people call this portable shrine when they used it in ancient times?
I think that probably the people in antiquity called such artifact Ark of God. And this is the biblical, the Hebrew name, Aron Elohim, Ark of God or cupboard of God.
So is this the truth about the Ark? That it was not a great and supernatural object? In the Hebrew Bible, the Ark of the Covenant is written Aron Habrit. Aron simply means chest or cupboard, a box to store things in.
In Hebrew, Aron means just a box where you can keep anything inside it. It's not necessarily something holy. Once you put inside a symbol of God, then the artifact became important. Not that the artifact by himself is not just a box. What is important is the meaning people gave to it.
In fact, Professor Garfinkel hasn't found just one Ark, but two. The second is made of pottery and is different in form, but it is also a little building with pillars, roof beams, and a door. Garfinkel believes it is another portable shrine, another Ark of God.
I was not looking for anything like the Ark or a thing like this, but once we have them, we need to deal and to interpret them. It's not just you find a nice thing, you put it in the museum and you go home. You also need to understand what you are doing.
Garfinkel's work reveals that there were many arks in many places, ritual shrines used by ordinary people as part of their worship. Does this mean the fabulous golden ark Ron was looking for may never have existed? Not necessarily.
When you have a large temple in Jerusalem, you have a large kingdom, you have a very nice ark, can be made with gold and silver and all kinds of other things. But in the small cities around it and in private houses, people will not have such big artifacts and made from such expensive materials.
So is it the case that the Ark of the Covenant, carried by the Israelites through the wilderness, could have been a simple object different from the one built for the temple in Jerusalem? No one knows for sure.
People can debate it. People can say that I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least I can offer a new interpretation.
What Ron Wyatt would make of this debate, we'll never know. He died in 1999. Until the end of his life, he devoted himself to making many more controversial discoveries, to prove that the Bible is fact. He said he had a sample of Christ's blood from the crucifixion which proved Jesus had no earthly father. He claimed he had an encounter with angels in the chamber where he found his ark.
Tables of stone were found in the Ark of the Covenant. I personally removed them with the assistance of 4 angels who lifted the mercy seat, which I would estimate weighs about 900 pounds of solid gold.
Ron Wyatt was a master at organizing expeditions, getting the public interested, getting money for his expeditions, and creating a huge following. Whether he was a charlatan or a zealot or a madman is up to individual people's opinions.
To those who believe him, he was none of these. He was a man inspired to do his work by his faith.
When I get to heaven, I'm going to look around, and I want to see every one of you there.
I just feel really blessed to have had a dad like my father, and to got to do this work. It's just been an amazing thing.
We may never know the truth about the Ark of the Covenant, but stories of its fabled power and symbolic importance ensure that each generation will dream of finding it.
The Ark exists today. It is somewhere. We know it.
The Ark has not yet been found in any location mentioned by the ancient sources. That doesn't mean it won't be found. If it is, it will be accidental. It will not be because somebody has gone out looking for it. They will have been looking or investigating or excavating something else entirely different. And lo and behold, there it will be.
In 1938, Adolf Hitler seized what legend said was history's most powerful weapon.
If you hold it, you're invincible.
It was said to be the spear which pierced the side of Christ.
Military leaders became almost besotted with the idea of possessing it.
And with the spear in his grasp, Hitler unleashed terror upon the world. But in the chaos of war, this most valuable of Europe's treasures simply vanished.
This was an emblem of war, twisted by the Nazis to become symbols of the Third Reich.
But one man, Walter Horn, would uncover the mystery of what had happened to the Spear of Destiny. And one of America's finest generals, obsessed with the spear, would launch a mission to find it. 1933, Adolf Hitler is elected Chancellor of Germany.
Hitler was by no means a normal person to be leading a country in the middle of Europe in the middle of the 20th century, and especially one the size of Germany. He was a very embittered, lonely, twisted, abnormal individual who had an enormous amount of drive and this famous will to power. And that's what really, spurred him on.
He is desperate to be the all-powerful leader of the German people and create a new Germanic empire. The trouble is, he had won less than half of the popular vote.
His grip on power was nothing like as strong as many people think. I mean, after all, most people hadn't voted for Hitler.
The country is divided, and to realize his dreams, he will need to unite it.
Germany was, until just a few years before, in real terms, just a collection of very, very small states. You've got people in, all up near the Danish border, and you've got people all the way down near Munich, and as far east into what would now be part of Poland. So how do you unify these people?
Hitler encourages the Germans to look to what he says is their past. He wants to portray himself as a man who will restore Germany to a time when it ruled Europe. And he wants to extend its borders to those of the greatest German empire in history, the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was first created by Charlemagne, Charles the Great, the Germanic king of the Franks in 800 AD. Its purpose? To spread Christianity through all of Europe. For 1,000 years it dominated the continent. At its height, stretching from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, and ruling over what is now Germany and much of Austria, Poland, Italy, and France. Now Hitler wanted to create an even greater empire in his own image. The 1,000-year Nazi Reich with himself at its head.
He wasn't the type of person who would like to cut deals and engage in the art of statesmanship or diplomacy. This is a man who just wanted to drive things forward the way he saw the world should be in his eyes.
But Hitler's difficulty is that there is nothing imperial about him. As the son of a working-class Austrian civil servant, it is not enough to simply proclaim himself the German Führer. He needs to look like one.
He needed to try and assimilate some of the trappings of power and the type of trappings that would be suitable for someone who is ruling a kingdom in the middle of Europe. And of course, what's he going to do? He's going to look back to history to find these things.
He decided that to be an emperor, he would need the possessions of an emperor.
Hitler was looking for an emblem that would underpin his claim to be leading the German people back to a new era.
What do we need? Well, we need various items that are associated with other people in power.
The Holy Roman emperors had held crown jewels as symbols of their authority. An imperial crown, a scepter, and an orb. But of all these symbols of past German glory, one is more important than all the others. It looks like a simple Roman spearhead. It is the Spear of Destiny. The Spear of Destiny was said to be none other than the spear that had pierced the side of Jesus Christ as he hung on the cross. The myth said that it was wielded by a Roman centurion called Longinus.
As the legend is told, Longinus was a Roman centurion who'd served Pilate faithfully, and he got cataracts. He was going blind. And Pilate pulled him out of the ranks because he was no longer of service as a fighter and gave him relative easy duty at Mount Calvary. making sure the crucifixions went off as planned. It didn't require a lot of fighting, didn't require great eyesight.
The Bible says that this centurion, when inspecting the crucified men, was unsure if Jesus had died. So he thrust his spear into Christ's side.
Blood allegedly dripped down the side of the spear into Longinus' eyes. He was cured of cataracts. He was cured of his blindness. He had a vision of the future. He had a vision of Jesus as the Messiah.
Longinus was converted instantly. As Christianity spreads throughout the world, Longinus' spear, touched by the Son of God, became a revered holy relic. The spear was passed down, first through a succession of Roman emperors, and then to Charlemagne.
Charlemagne carries it into battle, is invincible as long as it's in his hands.
It becomes known as a talisman for conquerors, for military force. It is a military image that it has of vanquishing foes.
Such was its mystique that every Holy Roman Emperor after Charlemagne wanted to possess it. It became a symbol of their authority.
The spear, at a very early point in history, is a reflection of power, of strength.
Legend says that whoever held the spear would be undefeated in battle.
So not only do you get a sense of whoever has this is the true world monarch because he has it, but if you hold it, you're invincible.
It was clear why Hitler wanted it, but he didn't have it. In fact, it was in Vienna, the capital of neighboring Austria. When the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved in 1806, its heirs, the Habsburgs, moved the spear to Austria, where it ended up on display in the Hofburg Palace. And it was here in 1908 that Adolf Hitler, then a struggling Austrian painter, had first seen the spear and begun to covet it.
According to one version of the story, Hitler had actually seen the spear in the museum there, and apparently he may have had some sort of moment of epiphany in which he realised that this was an incredibly important object and he had been sort of touched by it. Whether that's true or not doesn't really matter. The point was, it was regarded as being important.
Hitler had long known where it was, and now he was German Führer. All he had to do was take it. On March the 12th, 1938, German troops crossed the border into Austria. The world watched as the Austrian government collapsed. Hitler was killing two birds with one stone. He was reclaiming lands once held by the Roman Empire, and was now on the brink of seizing the Spear of Destiny.
You've got to realise that Austria and Germany are, in Hitler's eyes, indivisible, and indeed they should never have been divided in the first place.
With Austria in his grasp, Hitler now activated the second part of his plan. To seize the spear.
As the story is told, as the panzers were driving, across the border into Austria, Hitler had an SS officer in civilian garb already planted in the museum. When he was alerted that the border had been crossed, he changed into his uniform, pulled out his gun, and stood guard over those crown jewels. Nobody was to touch them until Hitler arrived.
Hitler arrived in Vienna just 2 days after the invasion.
One of the very first things he does is to go to the Habsburg Museum, go to the display case where the spear and the crown jewels are, and opens it. And takes possession of the spear.
He took hold of the spear on March the 15th. It was not a date picked by accident.
He took the Spear of Destiny on St. Longinus Day. That's when the centurion, who allegedly carried it at the crucifixion, is honored.
Hitler took the spear to the southern German city of Nuremberg, which had been its home for centuries during the reign of the Holy Roman Emperors.
There was absolutely no question where Hitler was going to take the spear once he absconded with it from Austria. He was going to take it back to Nuremberg, back to its spiritual home, what was to be the spiritual headquarters, the spiritual capital of Nazism, of the 1,000-year Reich.
Taking his lead from the Holy Roman Empire, Hitler had decided to place Nuremberg at the center of his new Nazi Reich.
Berlin is the brain, Nuremberg is the heart.
Here he had built vast parade grounds holding hundreds of thousands of spectators. He staged enormous rallies showcasing German military might. Extravagant displays presented the German people with an image of the future based on his vision of the past.
We see newsreels today of the parades going through the streets in Nuremberg, of soldiers dressed as medieval knights. With mock-ups of the chest of the crown jewels, symbolic of being returned to the homeland. The 1,000-year Reich begins.
By displaying the spear and the crown jewels, his message could not have been any clearer.
Ein freies deutsches Volk in einem starken deutschen Reich.
He was the heir to the Holy Roman Emperors.
It was as if King Arthur had finally gotten Excalibur and was marching through town with it. And in a triumphal parade, I got it.
With the Spear of Destiny in his possession, Hitler was convinced he would be unstoppable in his aim to conquer the rest of Europe. But of course, it didn't turn out that way. by the beginning of 1945. 5 years of war has devastated Europe. The spear has failed to bring Hitler the victory he had dreamed of. His ambitions lie in tatters. His empire on the brink of collapse. And in the chaos, the spear of destiny, one of the great treasures of Europe, has disappeared. But on an American army base in Belgium, pure luck will allow one man to track it down. Walter Horn is a lieutenant in the US Third Army. His mission? To interrogate German prisoners of war. Horn is no ordinary American GI. For one thing, he's German. And 10 years earlier, he had narrowly escaped the clutches of the SS. In the 1930s, Horn was at university in Heidelberg, southwest Germany. His passion, art history.
His specialty was the relics of the Holy Roman Empire. He was an art history major who just had the misfortune to get his doctoral degree in 1933, just as Adolf Hitler had come to power.
As a historian, Horn found himself being sucked into Hitler's obsession with proving the superiority of the German race. He was invited to join a special unit of the SS created specifically for this purpose, the Ahnenwerber. Promising academics were press-ganged into the Ahnenwerber. The job? To prove at any cost that German culture was superior to every culture in the world. And who better for the Ahnenwerber to recruit than the impressive young academic and PhD, Walter Horn.
Walter was perfect Nazi material. He had been a javelin contender for the Olympics. He came from fifth generation Germanic, Aryan stock. You know, he was young, he was good looking, he was well traveled. This was the kind of man the Nazis were looking for.
But Horn could see exactly where Nazi control of German academic life was leading.
The Ahnenwerber can't just be seen as a kind of harmless bunch of corrupted academics who were just sucking up to the Nazis, because what they were proving was helping to create a worldview that was in essence evil. And some of these theories are directly related to the idea of race. And we all know what happens when you apply these theories to a regime that is as murderous as the Nazis are. It leads directly to the gates of Auschwitz.
Horn wanted no part of it. So in 1934, he decided to flee Germany.
He didn't want to give up his homeland, but he saw no option around it. One thing he knew is he had to get out of Germany. You know, the storm is coming down. This is no place to be.
But as he began his flight to freedom, Horn learned that the SS were after him.
He was very concerned. He hated the Nazis. He didn't know if it was because of remarks that he had made about the Nazis.
To his horror, one SS officer had managed to track him down.
The SS officer had his pistol, and I'm sure Walter was thinking that the end had come.
But Horn was in for yet another surprise.
The SS officer essentially, told him, yes, we're looking for people like you, but good luck. Just don't come back.
Walter Horn eventually managed to escape via Italy and then Cuba to America, where he became a naturalized American citizen. And that is how, as a fluent German speaker, he ended up in Belgium interrogating POWs at the tail end of the war.
As the Allied armies worked their way into Germany, behind the front lines, you've got units doing various sort of ancillary roles that are nevertheless vitally important. One of these, of course, is to hunt for criminals. Straight manhunts. And what these people are doing, these war crimes units, is to hunt for evidence, which hasn't been burnt by the Gestapo.
For months, Horn had been uncovering very little, but one afternoon, a harmless-looking POW changed all that.
Quite late in the day, a relative old man is taken out of the prisoner pen to be interrogated. Private Fritz Huber. Fritz Huber has nothing really to contribute, or so it seems. Private Huber said, I'm sorry, I can't tell you any information because I don't know any information. All I've been doing is, slogging gun cases around. Walter felt sorry for him, offered him a cigarette, offered him a cup of coffee, and they just sat and chatted.
Then, Huber revealed something that would blow Walter Horn's mind.
Huber said, I do know of a special treasure, a hidden treasure. Are you at all interested in art history? Little could Huber have known the man he was talking to had a doctorate in art history. There wasn't anything in the world Walter wanted to hear more about, than art and antiques.
Huber began to tell Horn about a Nazi treasure trove hidden beneath Nuremberg Castle, one which supposedly contained any number of priceless pieces of art. Horn listened intently as Huber listed the sort of items that any imaginary pirate hoard might contain.
Huber was describing various treasures, which could have been any kind of depositories, because we know the Nazis looted, major museums. But this collection was different. He described a scepter. He described a crown. He described a golden orb, what they call, the world orb of Christianity. And then he said, it's a spear. It's a spearhead, Roman spearhead. And of course, Walter knew instantly the collection. There was no question what it was. He was describing, the crown jewels of the Holy Roman Empire and the spear of destiny.
Horn pushed Huber for every detail and was amazed to find out the lengths that the Nazis had gone to protect the Spear of Destiny. Huber said his father had been hired by the head of the Nazi SS, Heinrich Himmler, to install a ventilation system in a hidden vault beneath Nuremberg Castle.
And, oh, by the way, my mother goes in once a week to check on the treasures that are kept in this vault. She has to check the humidity, check against insects. My mother's got to wear white gloves. And as Huber is telling this story, Walter's getting more and more interested.
Huber described a network of tunnels beneath the castle which led out to a secret entrance on the streets below.
It looked like an active, ongoing antique shop and had two doors for bringing items in and out, but of course it was Nazis who were going the in and out.
Aware that he had possibly just uncovered the location of one of the world's great treasures, Horn immediately began to write up a report for his superiors. But fearing the American High Command wouldn't understand the importance of the spear, Horn made sure to write in detail, even drawing a map of the city to show where the vault could be found.
Walter Horn sat at a borrowed typewriter, and he typed up an intelligence report. And of course, being an art historian, I'm sure it reads more like a art history paper than a military intelligence report.
Horn worked quickly. He knew the advancing Allied forces were planning a huge offensive on Nuremberg. And he feared that in the battle, the spear could be destroyed.
He mailed it off, fully thinking that this would be dismissed as tangential to the fighting going on, that what military commander would possibly conceive the Holy Roman Empire, crown jewels, and the Spear of Destiny to be a military objective.
But in another amazing stroke of luck, Horn's report eventually landed on the desk of the one man who had both the power and the will to save the spear. General George S. Patton, also known as Old Blood and Guts, was in command of the US Third Army in Europe and was one of the generals overseeing the invasion of Germany. A flamboyant man, often pictured with 2 silver revolvers, he was a brilliant tank commander and tactician. A Catholic convert, Patton saw himself as a Christian warrior. But more than that, he too was obsessed with the legend of the Spear of Destiny. He had even written a poem about what it must have felt like to plunge the spear into the side of Christ.
I cannot name my battles, for the visions are not clear. Yet I see the twisted faces, and I feel the rending spear. Perhaps I stabbed our Savior in his sacred helpless side. Yet I've called his name in blessing when after times I died.
As US troops battled their way across Europe, Patton had been attempting to track the spear's movements. His fear was that the spear, if not found, might be used as a talisman to inspire a Nazi resurgence. But so far, he had no idea where the spear was, until Walter Horn's report landed on his desk.
Lo and behold, that's exactly what Patton was looking for, and he found it in that intelligence report. Light bulb went off. This was a military objective for Patton.
On the eve of the assault on Nuremberg, Patton took an amazing decision. He ensured that a crack team of soldiers was sent to locate the secret vault. But it would be no easy task. Nuremberg had suffered a series of massive bombing raids. Thousands had died, hundreds of thousands displaced.
They talk about the devastation in Dresden, but the devastation in Dresden essentially came from a fire that spread. In Nuremberg, it was literally from the tons and tons of bombs.
And now the Allies intended to send Hitler a message. they planned to capture Nuremberg on April the 20th, the Führer's birthday. Hitler was adamant that his spiritual capital would not fall.
His instructions are that the defenders of Nuremberg will fight to the last bullet, and the last man, and even the last young child.
On April the 16th, the US Army began a fight to the death for the city. Patton's special unit, sent to locate the spear, was soon caught in the thick of the fighting.
It was narrow, medieval streets, big battlements. It was almost essentially hand-to-hand combat, almost like taking one street after another, and it was very dangerous kind of fighting. Children were actually being used as scouts. The Germans fought right down virtually, to the last man standing.
In the chaos of the battle, Patton's unit, armed with Horn's man, embarked on their dangerous mission to locate the secret vault.
That unit lost many men to work their way where the vault was. When they got there, they couldn't even find it. There had been such devastation, so many bombings, and they weren't even sure that they'd gotten to the location.
But then they made a discovery.
One of them found a crevice, a sort of tunnel-like thing, and they dropped in.
At the end of a long, dark underground tunnel, they found something staggering. Set into thick concrete, a steel vault door 8 feet high and 12 inches thick. But there was a problem. The giant vault doors were locked shut.
The door itself was impenetrable at that point. When one of the munitions men was literally about to, plug dynamite in the sides of this giant vault door.
But just moments before the charges were detonated, a German civilian came forward and stopped the munitions man.
Luckily, he was stopped at the last minute because, God knows what might have happened to the contents inside. A German a representative, the mayor of Nuremberg, gave the Allies the combination of this vault. He said, please don't blow this up. Very special things here, and they opened the vault.
Behind the giant door, the GIs discovered a vast and incredibly sophisticated underground complex. This had to be the vault that the prisoner Huber had described, but it was on a scale beyond anything they had imagined. Commissioned by Heinrich Himmler, it was an enormous expansion of old beer cellars beneath the Nuremberg castle.
Himmler secretly sent in teams of architects, teams of builders to reconfigure this beer cellar into a high-tech vault. And I don't use that term high-tech loosely. Foot-thick reinforced steel, special locking mechanisms. The walls were lined with various materials to keep the moisture out. Air purification system, its own generator system. It had water, it had showers, it had baths, it had a kitchen, it had its own little escape hatch. You could have a team of people living in there for months at a time.
The GIs could hardly believe what they had found. But unsure of exactly what they had discovered, the message was sent for Horn to come to Nuremberg to identify the contents of the vault. When Horn arrived, he was shocked by the state of this once beautiful medieval city.
Picture a moonscape, picture churches missing their roofs, bodies strewn about.
Horn was led to the vault. Even though the contents had been described to him by Huber, Horn was stunned by what the vaults contained.
There is just this fantastic room full of Europe's treasure, which can rival anything you'll see in the Louvre or the British Museum. And it really is a real treasure trove. And the guys who went in there realised, my God, I mean, how much had the Nazis taken? You know, every box was just full of something more and more incredible.
Horn was shown a small wooden crate. In it, unmistakable to Horn's expert eyes, was the Spear of Destiny.
Horn became a hero when he recovered the Spear of Destiny. Now the question was, what were they to do with him?
May 1945, the Allies declare victory over Hitler's Nazi regime. 6 years of war draws to a close. Hitler had committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. The Allies uncovered millions of dollars worth of Europe's finest treasures, stolen by the Nazis.
We know the Nazis looted, major museums. Major collections were brought wholesale in by train.
Now began the task of returning these treasures to their rightful owners. Walter Horn had assumed the spear would be returned to Austria.
The Spear of Destiny come from the Hofburg Museum in Vienna. This is where he fully thought they would be returned to. Patton had other ideas.
It seemed that Patton, too, had become bewitched by the power of the Spear of Destiny.
Patton said and openly declared that these relics, this Spear of Destiny, are not artwork. These are emblems of war, twisted by the Nazis to become symbols of the Third Reich.
Patton was the type of man who very much would have liked the idea of the Spear of Destiny, in his back pocket and wanted to take it back to the United States.
Perhaps he believed, as did Hitler, that, whoever possessed the spear would be invincible.
So adamant was Patton on having the spear that Dwight Eisenhower, the supreme commander of all Allied troops in Europe, had to intervene. A huge argument broke out between these two iconic figures. But before it could be resolved, tragedy struck.
His car is hit by a lorry. He's virtually paralyzed. He's in hospital for a short period and then he dies.
With Patton died the last obstacle to the spear returning home to Vienna.
special plane was dispatched under a very heavy armed guard, because these are considered the most valuable treasures that the Nazis had ever looted. And there was a special return ceremony in Austria, and today they're back in the museum, essentially in the same room, in the same part of the museum where they were when Hitler took them.
But there remains one outstanding question. What was this item that Walter Horn had recovered, and that so many people had fought and died for? Could it really be the spear that Charlemagne held, the very spear that pierced Christ's side? Robert Feather, a trained metallurgist, was the first person in 40 years to be allowed to examine the spear scientifically.
I was called in to examine the spear because I'd had previous experience of metallurgical work on ancient artifacts. I trained as a metallurgist and I've sort of done a lot of work in ancient metals and materials.
One of the first tests he did was to see if there were traces of blood on the spear. If it were Christ's blood, it would be the most staggering discovery of all time.
I took swabs of the spear just in case there was any biological material. I mean, if it's a spear, it could have had some blood on it somewhere, and the remotest chance that some of it might be Jesus' blood just occurred. So I thought I'd better do it just in case. Is someone going to say, why didn't you?
But no traces of blood could be found. Next, he did a series of non-destructive tests to uncover the age of the spear.
We did XRF, which is X-ray fluorescent tests. We did microscopic analysis. We did full high-powered X-ray analysis.
These tests finally gave an approximate date to the spear itself. The 7th or 8th century AD.
To say that it was the spear that went into the side of Jesus, I think, is rather difficult, if not virtually impossible.
It's impossible really to have had much contact with someone who had supposedly died 8 centuries before it was made.
Science had proven that the Vienna lance was not the spear that had pierced the side of Christ. So does this mean it is worthless? Had thousands of lives been risked in pursuit of nothing more than a medieval forgery? After all, one uncomfortable fact, even for Hitler, was that it wasn't the only spear claiming to be the spear of destiny.
The problem with the spear is that there are quite a few of them. I mean, I think there are at least 4.
There are competitor spears in different places to the Vienna spear. There's one in Etzmiad in Armenia. It doesn't look very much like a spear, and it's more rather like a Roman bannerhead, but nevertheless they revere it. And there's another one in Poland, which is almost certainly a later middle-aged reproduction. There's another one in St. Peter's, in the Basilica of St. Peter's, which is said to be part of the spear that pierced the side of Jesus.
But it seems that the spear Hitler coveted had a value that none of the others had.
We know more about the early history of the Vienna spear than any of the others, and we can trace it certainly in written record back to the 8th century.
That date is extremely significant. It was when Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, was rising to power. This spear may not have been the spear which pierced Christ's side, but it was the spear held by the Holy Roman Emperors.
There's no question that that spear was the one carried by the Holy Roman Emperors, and that this was the one passed on, throughout history, through tradition, and was the one that Hitler took.
And Hitler had understood something else. It doesn't matter what something is. What matters is what people believe it to be. For centuries, the spear had been revered by the most powerful rulers of Europe, and that, for Hitler, was enough to make it something worth having.
It doesn't really matter whether this was the spear that was shoved into the side of Jesus. It doesn't matter. It's what people think is what matters. It's what people choose to believe.
The fact that it doesn't date back to the crucifixion doesn't make it, to my mind, any less valuable, because what it represents in the larger sense is what's important.
Even though it's very easy today to look at it as all being part of, it's all mumbo jumbo, it's kind of, junk history, it's kind of mythology, it's superstition, it's important.
In 1924, a young girl found an extraordinary object deep in the jungles of Central America. It was a beautiful skull made from a single block of pure quartz crystal. Anna Mitchell Hedges claimed that her skull had magical telepathic powers.
She felt that he could stare into the left eye socket and see the future.
Some say that Anna's crystal skull is part of an ancient legend. That one day 13 such skulls will come together as one to solve some of the great mysteries of life. But only if we are morally and spiritually ready to receive them. Some of these crystal skulls may have already been discovered. There is one in London, one in Paris, and one in Washington. What is the truth behind the legend of these crystal skulls? Modern science has begun to investigate, and now we can reveal the shocking reality behind the story of Anna and these crystal skulls. Will they really lead to a new dawn for the human race and save our planet from an apocalyptic end? The story of Anna and the crystal skulls begins with Anna's adopted father, Frederick Albert Mitchell Hedges. A self-made man and adventurer who is said to be one of the inspirations for Hollywood's blockbuster movies, Indiana Jones. Born in Victorian London in 1882, Mitchell Hedges started out as a clerk in London's Stock Exchange at the age of 16, but he didn't stay long. In his 20s, he sailed to New York and worked on Wall Street, where he made a small fortune.
I had left home with a few pounds and no job, and I returned at the age of 23 an assured man of the world, possessor of over £4,000.
He then decided to become an explorer and archaeologist. Supported by rich girlfriends and various newspapers, Mitchell Hedges devoted his life to the exploration of Central America and the Caribbean coast.
He took in a number of well-off ladies who traveled with him and in one case essentially funded him. I suppose you'd call him a good time boy.
Mitchell Hedges believed that a life which is lived without zest and adventure is not a life at all.
You can almost hear the biceps rippling under his shirt.
He loved to do battle with giant sea fish.
Every fish he caught was the largest fish that had ever been caught in that area.
I landed sharks of 800, 900 and 1,000 pounds. Then, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I struck into a fish that gave me my hardest fight ever. It was a giant sawfish, 29 feet long, with a girth of 19 feet, and just over 2 tons.
He claimed to have discovered a new race of people in Panama.
I now set about the task of discovering Central America. Thousands of square miles were uninhabitable, and there were wide regions of jungle, swamp, and mountains where no man had ever set foot.
He stated that he excavated 21 sites in Central America and told many tall tales.
Every bit of jungle was crawling with poisonous snakes and poisonous plants.
He even claimed to have unearthed artifacts as old as 25,000 years from the lost civilization of Atlantis.
Anyone who writes a book called Danger Is My Ally, you know what sort of person you're dealing with.
But despite his bravado, Mitchell Hedges was keen to be taken seriously as an archaeologist.
Mitchell Hedges certainly collected a lot of exotic archaeological material, some of which he illustrates in his books.
I have given to the enrichment of the museums in England and the United States some thousands of ethnological, archaeological, and ichthyological specimens. Never have I accepted a penny from a museum or institution, either to finance my expeditions or in reward for my endeavors.
During the 1920s, Mitchell Hedges explored the Central American country of Belize, and it was here that his link to the world's most famous crystal skull began. Accompanying Mitchell Hedges was his 16-year-old adopted daughter, Anna. Anna had lost both her parents by the age of 10. Her mother had died during childbirth, and her father in the First World War. Mitchell Hedges had taken the French-Canadian orphan under his wing in 1917, and Anna became his frequent travel companion. At this stage, they weren't looking for crystal skulls. Mitchell Hedges was determined to find one of the lost cities of the ancient Maya civilization deep inside the jungle.
If we could find it, we hope to be able to add considerably to the knowledge of the Mayan civilization.
The earliest traces of the Maya go back at least to 1500 BC and possibly as much as 2200 to 2500 BC.
The Maya were one of the ancient world's most advanced civilizations before their collapse more than 1,000 years ago. Their empire stretched across an area from southern Mexico to the Caribbean coast of Belize. The Maya people developed complex writing and mathematical systems. Their astronomers mapped the stars and measured time with calendars as precise as the ones we use today. Great artists created fine sculptures, carvings, paintings, murals, pottery, textiles, and jewelry. They constructed monumental cities with intricate temples, plazas, aqueducts, roads, and pyramids.
It's interesting how much archaeological work in the Maya area is surrounded by a kind of a miasma of romantic quality, you know, the sort of gleaming white temples in the jungle.
It was those gleaming white temples that Mitchell Hedges was now hoping to discover.
I had repeatedly heard natives talk of great mounds of stone buried in the jungle, and I had a rough idea in which area they lay.
Like her father, Anna would record their adventures together in great detail, and it's her accounts we largely rely on today.
We arrived in Belize and went into the jungle, which was very difficult. And my father stumbled upon a stone, and he shouted to the world, "We can't be far from this lost city."
According to Anna, her father enlisted the help of locals who were direct descendants of the Maya to fell the trees and clear the bush. Eventually, their work revealed something spectacular.
In the setting sun, the immensity of the ruins we had uncovered came home to us with overwhelming force. Slowly, the sky crimsoned, a red glow tinged the jungle and the desolate courtyards, the terraces, the pyramids of this great city, which we called Lubantun, the Maya word for the city of fallen stones.
Lubantun's an absolutely fascinating Maya site. It sits on a dramatic ridgetop between two ravines, about 20 miles inland from the coast of Belize, and it consists of a series of courtyards and temples and palaces. It was founded about AD 700, and we know that it was abandoned by about AD 850.
It was here, at this ancient Maya ruin, that Anna claimed she made an astonishing discovery.
I was 16 when I spotted it. It was New Year's Day, 1st of January, 1924. I heard two of the Mayas say, "If you go on top of that building, you'll have the most wonderful view." So I sneaked on top, and it was very dangerous. Something kept shining in my face. I moved 1 or 2 stones carefully. The sun was pouring on it. Way down below, through a crack, I could see something shining back at me. I got very excited.
Anna seemed to have discovered a chamber deep inside the pyramid, which was now overgrown with jungle vines and trees. What secrets, she thought, might it contain? Anna said how her father and his men cleared the stones away, and 3 weeks later, on her 17th birthday, she was allowed to explore the pyramid chamber.
I had a light, and I was let down by 2 ropes around my body. I was terrified of the snakes and scorpions that might be down there. But then, through the gloom, I could see something in the light. It was a skull, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. So I picked it up, wrapped it in my shirt so it wouldn't be hurt, and shouted to the men to pull me up as fast as they could.
Anna said that her discovery was the size and shape of a human skull and was almost completely transparent. It appeared to be made of crystal and in perfect condition. According to Anna, her father took the skull from her hands and held it high in the air for all the Maya to see.
There was a moment of stunned silence. Then all the Maya helpers went wild with joy, kissing the ground and hugging each other.
But was the skull a genuine Mayan treasure? And who had placed it deep inside the pyramid chamber? The answer, according to Anna, came 2 days later when they were visited by a Maya elder from a neighboring village.
He told us the skull was very ancient. It was made after the head of a great high priest many thousands of years ago, because the priest was loved very much, and they wanted to preserve his truth and wisdom forever. According to legend, it was used by the high priest of the Maya when he was performing esoteric rites. It is said that when he willed death with the help of the skull, death invariably followed. My father called it the Skull of Doom.
Anna said her father thought the skull was so sacred that he gave it to the Maya, much to Anna's displeasure.
I was very angry because I had risked my life to go down and get it.
But when their excavations of Lubantoon drew to a close, Anna said the Maya priests gave Mitchell Hedges the skull for all the good work he had done for their people. The family returned with the skull to England in 1927. Intriguingly, Mitchell Hedges kept the skull entirely secret for the next 27 years, when he would write about it in his 1954 autobiography, Danger, My Ally.
How it came into my possession, I have reason for not revealing. The Skull of Doom is made of pure rock crystal, and according to scientists, it must have taken over 150 years, generation after generation working all the days of their lives, patiently rubbing down with sand an immense block of rock crystal, until finally, the perfect skull emerged. It has been described as the embodiment of all evil. Several people who have cynically looked at it have died. Others have been stricken and become seriously ill. I do not wish to try and explain the phenomena.
Five years later, in 1959, Frederick Mitchell Hedges died of a stroke. No mention of the Skull of Doom appeared in his obituary in the Times, but Anna inherited it. It was now the crystal skull went public. Anna contacted a business colleague of her father's, San Francisco art dealer and restorer Frank Dorland, to promote her crystal skull in the US with a view to a sale for $50,000. Dorland wrote to her in November 1963.
The Skull of Doom, or perhaps more likely the Skull of Knowledge, as I have said many times before. I would like to handle this art treasure for you. We can launch a program about the skull and get your price.
Keen to make the most of her new possession, Anna wanted to prove the skull's authenticity. She flew to New York with it and left it with Dorland to carry out further research.
When I come out, it is so that I take out the skull of doom, which was the only thing my father ever kept from any of the expeditions. I hope that it too may one day find a home where it will be revered by all who see it.
Dorland spent the next 6 years exploring the mystical properties of Anna's crystal skull. He worked with various psychics and allowed other people to visit him to experience the many powers he believed the skull possessed.
Soon, peculiar things started to occur whenever the skull was out of the vault. We noticed that when we were very quiet, we could hear soft voices and music. Sometimes there was an odor, an elusive sweet, sour, wet fragrance that reminded me of apple blossom and vinegar, mixed with the unmistakable smell of an icy mountain stream. If we put our hands close to the skull, we could feel a tingling like an electric current, and there were other times when we clearly saw shapes and shadows moving about inside it. Here was an inanimate object sitting on our research desk, singing to us.
What was going on? In 1970, Dorland suggested to Anna that her skull should be examined at the Hewlett-Packard's laboratory in Santa Clara, California. One of the people that examined it was Charles Adams.
They brought this in, and it was quite an amazing piece, very well crafted. Of course, we were all interested in something like that, being quartz people.
The Hewlett-Packard scientists were asked to examine the skull to confirm that it really was a 1,000-year-old Mayan artifact.
We determined that it was a single piece of quartz. It was very clear. Well, we examined portions of the surface with a microscope. We couldn't find any tool marks that would indicate that it was done with modern machinery.
No sign of any modern tool marks at all. This proved that the skull had to be ancient.
It probably was done by hand over a very long period of time, probably more than one person's lifetime, where they take stones and rub them together and use sand and water to polish them out. That would seem to be the more likely way that this thing was built. Could have been, over several generations these things were carved.
All this seemed to fit with what Mitchell Hedges had written about the skull in his autobiography, Danger, My Ally.
It must have taken over 150 years, generation after generation working all the days of their lives, patiently rubbing down with sand an immense block of rock crystal, until finally the perfect skull emerged.
But some scientists concluded something even more extraordinary. The crystal skull was so perfect that it was made by no known human process, which prompted one team member to remark, "This skull shouldn't even exist at all." Now Anna asked the scientists to do something even more difficult. She wanted them to prove that her skull's mystical powers were real.
The people who brought it in really wanted us to verify, mystical qualities of these things. And there's no way that, in science you can verify a mystical apparition, so to speak. And so we declined on that area of getting involved in any comments.
Dorland, however, wrote a letter for Anna stating that
it wards off the evil eye and carries protection from heaven. Being white crystal and highly polished, it defeats all evils and witchcraft.
Now Anna appeared to have supporting evidence of her skull's mystical powers and proof that it was a genuine Maya artifact. The 63-year-old Anna Mitchell Hedges set about exploiting its potential. Anna's timing was perfect. During the 1960s and early 70s, the Western world saw a new social counterculture revolution emerge, and with it, a new age of spiritualism. This led to a huge interest in quartz for its alleged healing, meditation, and energy-giving qualities. Crystal skulls were suddenly in fashion.
People are attracted to anything that seems inexplicable. So it isn't just touching something from the past, maybe seeing the future, but something that can't be explained on any level that one can think of. That attracts people's attention. People love mystery.
These aren't just skulls, they're transparent and they're very, very hard and they appear almost flawless. You know, you handle them, you look at them, and they are impressive objects.
When you got the fusion of the imagery of the skull with the rare and exotic material of massive rock crystal, you got something that fascinated people, particularly in the New Age cults.
Over the next 30 years, Anna made the most of her skull's mystique and became a minor celebrity.
She would take the skull on tour around the United States.
Everywhere she went, she told people of her discovery of the skull at Luban Tomb and the amazing qualities it possessed.
The Mayan priests told me the skull is important to mankind. They gave us the skull for a definite reason and purpose. I am not exactly sure what that reason is, but I know it is something very, very important. I lived 7 years with the Mayan people as a child and ate and slept the same way they slept on the earth. And once you have lived with people who are so down to nature, you've got to believe them.
She would be preceded by a barrage of publicity to the local papers and television stations, which would be told that the rock crystal skull of doom was coming to town.
Laugh at this, says the Maya legend simply, and you die. The owner is the explorer and the collector is Anna Mitchell Hedges. Well, do you believe that one?
Yes, I do believe that, very much so. Because we've had quite a few accidents happen while we've had it.
What sort of accidents are those?
A cameraman who came to film it, and he laughed at it. And when he went to develop his film, the place blew up. And I still believe that the man is still running.
She would rent a room in a local hotel, and the skull would be put on a black velvet-covered plinth with a spotlight on it, and she would then charge $5 for admission to look at it.
She would allow people to touch it. In some cases, actually to lift it up and turn it round and look at it.
Has nothing ever good come out from the skull of doom?
Not to people who would laugh at it. But to me, it's always been very kind.
In what way do you mean?
Well, I love it because I first found it with my father, and it's my first little treasure that I found on my own, really.
Some people now started to link Anna's crystal skull to an even more extraordinary story. There is said to be an old legend from Central America which says there are only 13 ancient life-size crystal skulls in existence. These 13 skulls are said to contain vital information about the origins, purpose, and destiny of mankind. And that one day the 13 crystal skulls will all come together to solve some of the great mysteries of life. Over the years, some of these ancient crystal skulls may have revealed themselves. In 1878, an ancient life-size Aztec crystal skull was donated to the Musée de l'Homme in Paris. In January 1898, another life-size Aztec crystal skull went on display at the British Museum in London. Then, of course, there's the Anna Mitchell Hedges crystal skull found in Belize in 1924. Could these be 3 of the 13 ancient crystal skulls that were coming together to save our planet? If so, where were the other 10? Then, in 1992, something strange happened that would alter the world's entire perception of Anna Mitchell Hedges and the legends of the crystal skulls. An enormous skull, weighing over 30 pounds, turned up anonymously on the doorsteps of the Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. But this skull was accompanied only by an unsigned modern note. It said, "This Aztec crystal skull purported to be part of the former President of Mexico's collection and was purchased in Mexico in 1960. I am offering it to the Smithsonian without consideration."
One of the curators there called me and asked me if I knew anything about crystal skulls. So I knew the British Museum had a skull, so I said, well, yes, a little. And he said, well, someone sent us one, and I don't know what to do with it. So I said, well, I'll take it. So he said, ooh, don't look it in the eye. They're cursed. So that was the beginning of my introduction to crystal skulls.
Walsh discovered that human skulls and skull imagery featured in Aztec art and iconography and were often carved by Aztec and Maya engravers. But there was little mention of them using crystal for their skulls. She also noticed that the first crystal skulls only began to surface in public and private collections during the second half of the 19th century, and they were all associated with one person.
What I discovered about the Paris Museum skull was that their collection had been purchased from a French dealer in the 19th century named Eugène Bobin.
Bobin was an antique dealer obsessed with ancient Mexican artifacts. He first put on display an Aztec crystal skull in his shop in Paris in the 1870s.
He hunted and excavated archaeological sites and sold what he uncovered.
In 1878, Bobin's Aztec crystal skull ended up on display at the Musée de l'Homme in Paris. Walsh then discovered that another Aztec crystal skull had also appeared in Eugène Bobin's Paris shop. Bobin described this skull as a masterpiece of engraving and claimed it was unique in the world. In 1896, it was sold to the world-famous New York jewelers, Tiffany's, for the asking price of $900. The New York Times referred to the skull's sale as the highest-priced object in the largest sale ever held in this country. 10 years later, in 1897, that skull was on permanent display at the British Museum. Two Aztec crystal skulls, one in Paris and one in London, both linked to Eugène Bobin. In 1996, intrigued by Walsh's discoveries, the British Museum decided to collaborate with the Smithsonian to determine the origin of both their skulls.
The thing that really started us going was that we had a call from Jane Walsh from the Smithsonian Institution. She had been left a large quartz skull and was getting very interested in where it came from and also its relationship to the British Museum skull.
Just as the Hewlett-Packard scientists had subjected the Anna Mitchell Hedges skull to a battery of tests, similar tests now took place at the British Museum. The first thing they did was try to date their Aztec skulls.
You can't radiocarbon date quartz crystal. It has no carbon in it, it's impossible. So you have to turn to other methods to date it. Now, the way we nearly always do this is by looking at the way things were made, what you might call dating the technology. So we started on a program of analysis to look at the way the quartz crystal itself had been carved.
First, they started looking for tool marks with the most sophisticated technology.
So we have to use quite detailed microscopic techniques to look at the way these things have been worked.
Their tests revealed that the British Museum and the Smithsonian Aztec skulls were found to have some very faint traces of straight lines on their surfaces. Could a Stone Age technology have created these straight lines? The scientists examined the surface tool markings on several Aztec rock crystal objects from well-documented excavations in Mexico. This included a rock crystal goblet, which is the largest rock crystal artifact to have been recovered from a pre-Columbian site. The ancient Aztecs would have used hand tools and sharpened stone and wood combined with sand to craft their materials. The test showed these ancient tools left uneven, ragged lines on the surface. They then compared these ragged hand tool lines with the straight marks found on the British Museum and Smithsonian skulls. It was clear that two very different technologies had been used. Using just hand tools, it would have been impossible for the ancient Aztecs to create such perfectly straight lines as those on the British and Smithsonian skulls. The only way these straight lines could have been made was by using rotary cutting wheels. These were not introduced in Mexico until after the Spanish conquest in 1521. Further examinations of the two skulls were carried out under the powerful eyes of their scanning electron microscope. And the scientists made a shocking discovery. Both the London and Smithsonian crystal skulls showed clean rows in arcs across their surfaces. Only one type of tool could have done this, something with an industrial diamond head. Industrial diamond heads were first used in the 19th century. This meant the skulls could not have been made before then. There could be no doubt. The London skull, presumed to be Aztec and on show at the British Museum for more than 100 years, was a modern fake. The Smithsonian Aztec skull, found on a Washington museum's doorstep in 1992, was a modern fake. And the Paris crystal skull, labeled Aztec since 1878, also turned out to be a fake.
The British Museum skull was probably made not too long before it first appeared in Bobon's shop in 1881. The testing that the Louvre did on the Paris skull seems to indicate that it was created sometime during the 1850s. And the Smithsonian skull seems to have been polished using a technique that was only available after World War II. So it makes sense that it was probably made sometime in the 1950s.
3 fake skulls in London, Paris, and Washington. That only left the Anna Mitchell Hedges skull found in Belize in 1924. All the while, Dr. Jane Walsh had been continuing with her investigation. She came across 2 records referring to yet another crystal skull. The first was an article published in the journal Man in 1936. This told of a London art dealer named Sidney Burney who had purchased a crystal skull in 1933. The second stated that Burney had put his crystal skull up for auction at Sotheby's of London in 1943. and that it was sold to none other than a Mr. Frederick Albert Mitchell Hedges for £400. This was 20 years after Anna Mitchell Hedges had claimed she found her crystal skull in the ruins of Lubantoon. Anna immediately went on the defensive. According to her, there was a simple explanation. She had indeed found the skull in 1924, but in 1943, her father was experiencing some real hardship.
Father was wanting to return to Lubantoon, but was short of money. Mr. Burney loaned Father money, and Father left the skull with him as security until he could redeem it. Then he heard that he had placed it in a sale room, and Father was livid. He paid Burney with interest and reclaimed the skull.
But when Anna was asked if she had any records showing that the skull was owned by her father prior to Burney's acquisition, she said that all his papers had been lost during a cyclone. Anna Mitchell Hedges died at the age of 100 in 2007. She claimed to the end that she discovered her ancient Maya crystal skull in a pyramid tomb in Belize in 1924. Only in 2008, after Anna had died, did Dr. Jane Walsh get her chance to examine the Mitchell Hedges skull at the Smithsonian Institute.
The first time I saw the Mitchell Hedges skull was in my office, as it was taken out of a velvet-covered container. And I was taken aback by the clarity of the crystal, the gleaming shine and polish of it. It really looked like a jewel.
Technology had advanced greatly since the Hewlett-Packard lab tested the Mitchell Hedges skull back in 1970.
We decided to try and examine it in as many ways as possible. So we arranged to have it CAT scanned. We X-rayed it. We took silicone molds of it.
After an array of tests under a highly sophisticated scanning electron microscope, Walsh finally arrived at the truth.
What we're looking at on the screen now is a mold I took from a 3,000-year-old pre-Columbian carving in jade. And it's clear that they're using a sharpened stone that can only go sort of back and forth. It's also a very soft polishing technique that's been used, with a lot of the indentations on the stone remaining unpolished. In contrast, this is some of the teeth from the Mitchell Hedges skull. You can see some very tiny wheels that have been used to make the indentations on the chewing surface of the teeth. In the final analysis, when we saw these images, there was simply no doubt in our mind that the Mitchell Hedges skull is the creation of a modern stone carver using diamond tools, very small drills and cutting wheels that simply could not and did not exist in pre-Columbian times.
There could be no doubt. The Mitchell Hedges skull was a fake. Anna's story of finding it at Lubantoon on her 17th birthday in 1924 was simply not true. Suddenly, it all fell into place. The reason why Frederick Mitchell Hedges never mentioned the crystal skull when he returned to England after his trip to Belize in the 1920s was because he didn't have it. Instead, he had bought the skull from Sidney Burney in 1943. He even wrote a letter to his brother in the same year telling him about it.
You possibly saw in the papers that I acquired that amazing crystal skull that was formerly in the Sydney Burney collection. There is only one other in the world known like it, which is in the British Museum, and it is acknowledged to be not so fine as this.
This revelation explains why Mitchell Hedges never mentioned in his 1954 autobiography Danger My Ally a reference to his daughter finding the crystal skull in Belize in 1924. In fact, she wasn't even with him that year. According to his autobiography, his daughter didn't join him in Belize until 1926. That's 2 years after Anna claimed she had found the skull. It has since emerged that there is no record of Anna ever visiting Belize until the 1980s.
It was an extremely graphic account. One could easily believe that she had been standing there, and yet there's absolutely no evidence that she was there at all.
So why did Anna invent such an extraordinary story? The answer may be quite simple. When her father died, she was left with no income. She had to find a way to support herself, and she only had one asset.
Her father was this great storyteller. He made a living writing stories of enormous fish that got away for the newspapers. And I think Anna, maybe having been around him for a long time, picked up on his ability to spin a yarn.
It appears that she invented the story, perhaps with her father, of discovering the crystal skull in a pyramid chamber in the Maya ruins of Lubantun in Belize in 1924 to make some money.
Through the gloom, I could see something in the light. It was a skull, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen.
Anna Mitchell Hedges started as a liar, she became an accomplished liar, and she finished as a fantasist.
I first found it with my father, and it's my first little treasure that I found on my own, really.
I think over the years, having told the story so many times, she had come to believe it herself.
Anna managed to spin the yarn for more than 40 years. And most people who came to hear about the skull, or had a chance to see it on her pay-per-view roadshow, believed it was the genuine article.
I'm not really surprised she got away with it for so long, because people are always willing to believe the irrationally mysterious over the rationally prosaic.
People love mystery, and they probably, as a result, greatly prefer things such as the crystal skull to the average archaeological presentation. They'd far rather that those objects were so mysterious that we couldn't say anything at all about them, that they fit, in other words, the pattern of the crystal skull.
So where do these revelations leave the Central American legend of the 13 crystal skulls that says that one day they will come together to solve some of the great mysteries of life? So far, all the famous crystal skulls have been shown to be modern fakes, probably made in Europe. And science has yet to find any convincing evidence that there ever was a Central American crystal skulls legend.
There was no evidence for there being crystal skulls in any of the ancient American civilizations. In fact, the Maya didn't really have rock crystal at all. It's not a native material to the Maya area, so archaeology ignored the stories because they seemed irrelevant.
The fact that the legend seems to be a modern invention won't stop many people believing that there are 13 ancient crystal skulls still out there, and that one day they will all come together as one to save our planet. Legend has it there's a 5,000-year-old book of magic. It was handed down by an Egyptian god and contains spells that can predict the future. It's called the Book of Thoth. And what it says is deeply mysterious. Some say it contains ancient rituals used by secret organizations.
Each person who is admitted to the order must die symbolically and be reborn.
Others say it offers readers the power to divine the future through tarot cards.
The original book of the Tarot was really engraved on gold tablets, and it was a book of Thoth.
For yet others, the book offers its followers a world of free love and drugs, central to the rock and roll culture of the 1960s.
Some of the most famous people in the world, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, are deeply interested in this sort of thing.
But what is the truth about the Book of Thoth? What does it really say? Does it even exist? Now scholars in Egypt are finding the answer. This is the story of the quest to find the truth about what some claim is the most important book ever written. Central London. Among the hustle and bustle are bookshops specializing in the occult and esoteric. They sell everything from books on ancient wisdom to magic charms. But one of the most common images is that of an ancient Egyptian god. He's called Thoth, a strange figure with the body of a human and the head of an animal. And on the shelves are copies of his book, the so-called Book of Thoth.
5,000 years after the books of Thoth were originally composed, they are still beguiling modern people. I get asked to talk at conferences where the imagery above the stage, on the name cards, is a figure of Thoth.
So who was Thoth? And why does a text from an age dating back to the pyramids exercise such a pull, even today? The answer lies in a tangled tale that started over 2,000 miles away in North Africa. The Nile Valley. For years, at sites across Egypt, archaeologists have been uncovering what is probably the greatest civilization of the ancient world. Martin Raven has been digging at a 4,000-year-old burial ground.
We have uncovered this vast necropolis full of tombs with beautiful paintings, wall reliefs, inscriptions.
Digs like this have revealed that ancient Egypt had a sophisticated culture, a complex belief system, and a pantheon of gods. One of the most important was Thoth. He appears as a human body with the head of an ibis, or as the figure of a baboon.
Ancient Egyptian gods were invisible, but if they wanted to manifest themselves to our poor eyes, they needed a bodily form. Many gods had a sacred animal that was thought to be connected with them. The baboon, a monkey, looks very wise sometimes, very human-like. He must have deep thoughts. So he was connected with the god Thoth. The other sacred animal is the ibis. He's very quiet, he walks through the marshes, through the mud, but he looks as if he also has very deep thought.
To the ancient Egyptians, Thoth was a god with exceptional powers.
Thoth was the secretary of the gods. He noted down what they decided. So he became the god of wisdom, sometimes also the god of healing, and the god of magic.
According to legend, Thoth handed down this magic to mortals in a book. It was said to grant its readers amazing powers.
Ancient Egyptian literature has it that the Book of Thoth contains esoteric or magic wisdom, secret wisdom, that would allow an individual to communicate with the gods, talk to animals, to access the afterlife, these kinds of things.
There's a wonderful story about a very important magician who found out where this Book of Thoth is kept, and he appropriates it. And he suddenly understands the language of other animals. And also he sees all the stars moving in the sky. He finally understands the mechanism that is behind the whole universe.
Such was the reputation of the Book of Thoth. Its fame would spread across the ancient world. In the 3rd century BC, the warrior king Alexander the Great invaded Egypt. The Greek occupiers were amazed by what they found.
They were overawed by this ancient civilization with wonderful buildings, the pyramids, statuary, all of the fabulous stuff that we see today, but then it was in its full glory.
They were so impressed they adopted much of the Egyptian belief system, including some of their gods. One of them was Thoth.
The Greeks already had a figure of Hermes, who they believed to be the god who was the patron of what we would call science. He was the inventor of writing. So they came across the figure of Thoth, who the Egyptians believed was also the inventor of all the mathematics, the geometry, which had enabled them to build the pyramids. So the Greeks associated their figure of Hermes with the figure of Thoth from ancient Egypt.
The Greeks declared that Thoth and Hermes were the same god. It said they also adopted Thoth's book and created a new version, the Corpus Hermeticum. But as they did so, Greek influences crept in. The original Egyptian text and the new Greek text became confused. And so, as Greek culture swallowed Egyptian, Thoth's original text simply disappeared. One legend relates that a last copy of the original book was buried alongside the inquisitive Egyptian magician who'd read it and discovered the secrets of the stars. But whatever the truth, the original Egyptian Book of Thoth was lost, replaced by a new Greek version. The original text would not be rediscovered for thousands of years. The Greeks were followed by the Romans. The wisdom of the Corpus Hermeticum was absorbed into early Roman culture. But then came a momentous change. Christianity spread across Europe. References to pagan gods like Thoth and Hermes were banned. The Greek version of the Book of Thoth was suppressed.
With the rise of Christianity, and especially with Christianity being adopted by the Roman Empire as the official religion, this older pagan philosophy gets wiped out.
Those who advocated pagan ideas were burnt at the stake or broken on the wheel.
The general kind of ravages of intolerance and conquest led to the loss of the Corpus Hermeticum.
First, the original Egyptian Book of Thoth had vanished. Now the Greek version, the Corpus Hermeticum, disappeared from sight too. Whatever had been written in the Book of Thoth seemed to have been lost forever. But then there was another revolution in Western thinking. In the 1300s, the Renaissance arrived in Italy. It was a time of intellectual ferment and questioning. New ideas were born, and old ones rediscovered. They included the wisdom of classical Greece and Egypt.
The very word Renaissance means rebirth, and its first use of it that we find in the 1400s is somebody who says, I seem to see in this new learning the rebirth of the ancient culture.
With it came a renewed interest in pre-Christian ideas.
If you think of Botticelli's paintings, for example, of Venus and Mars, or the birth of Venus, these are pagan gods and goddesses which are being painted for the first time in Europe for 1,000 years.
This new interest in the wisdom of the past included the rediscovery of the Greek version of the Book of Thoth, the Corpus Hermeticum. To the Christian culture of the time, it was an explosive find. The Catholic Church had been ruling Europe for over 1,000 years. There was a growing sense it was overbearing and overpowerful.
The institutions had become terribly corrupt. The office of the Pope had been thoroughly discredited, indulgence were being bought and sold. The Church had fallen into a very low respect by even the common people.
There was a groundswell of opposition. People began to look back to classical Egypt and Greece for alternative religious inspiration.
Somebody brought to Florence the books of Hermes, the Corpus Hermeticum, and the court of the Medici, still reeling from the discovery of Plato and the pre-Socratic philosophers, suddenly found themselves with these books of Hermes, the books of Thoth, for the first time.
The Greek version of the Book of Thoth was translated into Latin and published in Italy.
It becomes one of the most influential books of the time. It goes into several printings over the next century and a half.
It may not have been the original Egyptian text, but it spread through the Renaissance world on a wave of optimism. What made the message of this Greek version of the Book of Thoth so exciting was its vision of man's place in the world. For those seeking to challenge the orthodoxy of the Church, it came as a revelation.
It was a completely different view of mankind, not as a fallen creature who, after being booted out of the Garden of Eden, wandered lost. The discovery of the books of Thoth was saying, no, man has an exalted position within creation.
The message of the Book of Thoth seemed to be saying that man was more than a servant to the gods.
Not only did he have the same powers as the gods, it was his duty to use those powers to create a better world, a more beautiful world.
Thoth seemed to offer a new vision of the importance of man's place on Earth.
In the books of Thoth, it says that man is halfway between the angels and the animals and has a very special role. He is a co-creator with God. And he must create objects of beauty just as God has created objects of beauty.
There's this whole idea of optimism about man, about the powers of the mind, the imagination, the ability to understand the world.
To many people, the Book of Thoth seemed to offer an intensely attractive vision of mankind. What made this message even more powerful was its age. It seemed to come from a purer time, before the Church had been corrupted.
If you were a Renaissance man, the idea was formed in your mind that if we could somehow restore this ancient wisdom to its proper place, we could once again live in a pristine world. So what was old was really good.
And dating apparently from ancient Egypt, Thoth's knowledge was as old as any in the world.
If you think of it as this kind of cascade, this sort of a mountain or lake at the top full of this clear crystal water, and then through the ages, it comes down. It's still the same water, but it gradually gets a bit muddy. And what the philosophers of the Renaissance believed when they had the Corpus Hermeticum in their hands is they were going to the source. They were going to, sort of the pure waters of the ancient knowledge.
Yet the irony was that this whole alternative philosophy was based on the Greek version of the Book of Thoth. Nobody could be certain how much it had to do with the original Egyptian text. Yet in the name of Egyptian wisdom, it would now lead in some very curious directions. In the early 1700s, the first Grand Masonic Lodge was established in London. It would grow into the most powerful and successful secret society of all time. An organization of politicians and presidents, business and civic leaders. But in the early 1700s, it was composed of a small group of men looking for a better world. It was a time of war and intolerance. There was fighting between England and Scotland, Catholic and Protestant.
The period when Freemasonry was developing was a period of great immorality. Politics and religion, huge amounts of corruption. They were trying to find a way to bring people together, to forget those differences.
The early Masons cast around for inspiration. They found it in the Renaissance rediscovery of the ancient world.
We may not be able to trace the historical linkages directly, but we can say that the rituals and the foundation purpose of Freemasonry stretches right back into ancient Egypt.
Like Renaissance man before him, the early Masons were beguiled by Thoth's can-do vision of mankind.
The classical world in Egypt was seen as the start of real civilization, where things like science, like mathematics, mathematics being the foundation of building, the Masons then saw that as the foundation of the art that they grew out of. So there's a huge reverence for anything from classical times and from ancient Egypt.
To mark this reverence, the Masons adopted Egyptian images.
You suddenly get the importation of sphinxes, pyramids, anything to do with Egypt. We're sitting in Freemasons Hall in London, and lodge room number 10 there is a superb example of a restrained Egyptian architecture. They got copies of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and the walls of their temples are decorated with those, with Egyptian pillars, with lotus work.
Most significantly, the Masons focused on one particular part of the Corpus Hermeticum. It was a ritual every Mason would have to go through. It came, they believed, straight from ancient Egypt. It was the ritual of rebirth.
Each person who is admitted to the order must die symbolically and be reborn as a new person. And this idea of rebirth, it's central to the books of Thoth, to the Corpus Hermeticum. And Thoth appears again in all his majesty, just as he had for the ancient Egyptians, as the figure who would grant all knowledge to the initiate and also guarantee them personal immortality.
A new era claimed to have rediscovered the ways of ancient Egypt, even though the text they'd based it on was Greek. But nobody could say what was in the original Book of Thoth. As a result, there would soon be several other versions of it. Paris, the late 1700s. As Freemasonry was spreading through Europe, something new was stirring in France. Antoine Coeur de Gébelin was a French-Swiss writer and thinker.
Coeur de Gébelin, who was an occultist, he was a Mason. In fact, he belonged to the same Masonic lodge in Paris that Voltaire belonged to, and he was friends with the King of France. So he was really connected.
Coeur de Gébelin had two overriding interests. One was ancient Egypt. The other was card games. Cards were a popular pastime. Many were illustrated with mythical or popular figures and events. They were used to play a game called tarot, the 18th century equivalent of rummy or bridge. In the mid-1700s, Coeur de Jabelin put his two interests together. Thumbing through a deck of tarot cards, he came to a startling conclusion.
So he starts looking through the deck and goes, wow, this is based on Hermetic philosophy. And then he starts looking through the cards and he starts realizing that they all seem to be about the most important book in the world, the book of knowledge, the book of Thoth. It was just disguised as a common deck of cards.
Coeur de Jabelin's theory that the cards were the original Book of Thoth was not as strange as it appears. He knew that the Egyptians would have used hieroglyphics to write the Book of Thoth. Hieroglyphics are pictures, so are tarot cards. It therefore made sense to him that the original Egyptian wisdom of the Book of Thoth could have once been represented by pictures on cards. It just needed somebody with the insight of Coeur de Jabelin to discover it.
So here we had this set of cards that were in pictures, but this could actually be this hieroglyphic book. So this could be the Book of Thoth.
In 1733, Coeur de Jabelin announced his conclusions in a new book. It made the entirely novel claim that the Book of Thoth, lost for 5,000 years, was actually a pack of cards. He even claimed the word tarot derived from ancient Egypt.
He said that the word tarot, he felt was an Egyptian word, which proved that the tarot was Egyptian. And he said that it was the Egyptian word tar-ra, which meant the royal road, being the royal road to knowledge, suggesting that it was the Book of Thoth.
It didn't seem to matter at the time that nobody could read Egyptian hieroglyphics. Coeur de Jabelin believed he'd stumbled on a profound truth and discovered the original Egyptian Book of Thoth. His book would generate widespread interest. One man captivated by it was an itinerant salesman, teacher, and spiritualist called Jean-Baptiste Alliette. For years, he'd been dabbling in the occult. He now took Coeur de Jabelin's idea and turned it into his own. He published a subtly different set of tarot cards. He called them the Atella Tarot.
Alliette basically called himself Atea for magical reasons, and all it was his last name spelled backwards.
The cards had what Alliette claimed was an authentic Egyptian feel.
You see in this first card here, which represents a male querent, that he actually looks like an Egyptian man.
A querent is a person seeking knowledge in a tarot reading. But Alliette didn't stop there.
Okay, now if we compare the Fool in this Atea to the French Fool, you see the French Fool, and he's being attacked by a dog because he's a stranger. Now, to make it sound more Egyptian, Atea thought that the creature attacking him should be a leopard, thinking that leopards came from Egypt. So to see our Fool's being bitten on the leg by a leopard instead of a dog.
These cards, according to Alliette, represented the true wisdom of Thoth. Moreover, they could do something truly magical. They could divine the future. In 1788, Alliette formed a Society for the Interpretation of the Book of Thoth. It was a society dedicated to the reading of his tarot cards.
Just going to go and look at the long term up here. So what we've got here is definitely...
Nearly 2,000 years after it had vanished, it was now claimed the original Egyptian version of the Book of Thoth had reappeared, thanks to the work of two Frenchmen. The legend of the Book of Thoth had taken another twist. But there would soon be yet another version of the book. In 1904, a strange and idiosyncratic Englishman traveled to Egypt. He was called Aleister Crowley, a leading member of an occult society called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Crowley, he thought he was an artist, a painter, a poet, a great magician. He was going to be something great. He just knew he had greatness in him.
He even saw it in his name.
Some people pronounce his name Crowley and some Crowley. In his own writings, he said it's pronounced Crowley, it rhymes with holy.
One day in Cairo, he claimed he was told the ancient Egyptian gods had a message for him. Over the course of 3 days, he said he received a series of revelations.
He sat in his study at his desk with his writing materials, and then this being came in that was sort of like transparent, and came and stood behind him over his shoulder, over his left shoulder, and dictated to him what to write, and he just wrote it down.
Crowley had no doubt who was speaking to him.
Basically, this is message coming from Thoth.
Crowley called the text he'd received the Book of Law. If he was telling the truth, this was surely the most authentic version of the Book of Thoth ever. It had come from the god himself. Crowley described it as a gospel for a new age. His version of the Book of Thoth consisted of a series of tenets.
So line 3 says, every man and every woman is a star. And so now he's saying that we're all like stars. You see, we don't need one central being to give us direction, that we each can find our own direction.
To this end, Crowley argued the most important tenet of his new Book of Thoth was do as thou will shall be the whole law. Thoth, in the shape of the Book of Law, became the basis of a new freewheeling religion. Crowley called it Thelema. It was a religion in which almost anything went.
Thelema means will, which of course what everybody talks about when they talk about Crowley. But it doesn't just mean will, it means like desire, it means including like sexual desire.
Crowley's new version of the Book of Thoth put sexual magic at its center. And the sexual act became a sacrament.
They practiced free love, they took drugs, they had visions, they were promiscuous, they had lots of children. He wasn't trying to con anybody. He really felt that he was somebody important.
Finally, towards the end of his life, Crowley pulled his thoughts together. But it wasn't in a book. It took the form of another set of tarot cards.
Crowley felt that the tarot cards were this whole message of everything he was trying to get across, this whole philosophy of Thelema.
He published them as yet another version of the Book of Thoth. Thoth's book, originally written on papyri, had gone through another metamorphosis. Now it seemed a justification for, among other things, some very strange sexual practices. Crowley died in 1947, but his legacy would be carried on by a new generation. (1960s) Britain. Crowley's version of Thoth was adopted by the rock and roll counterculture. His face even appeared on the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album. A decade later, one man fascinated by it was Gary Latchman, bass player with the 1970s new wave band
some of the most famous people in the world, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, are deeply interested in this sort of thing. They start getting into meditation, they start checking out their tarot, they start being interested in their aura and a variety of different occult sorts of things.
Lachman believes much of the counterculture of the rock and roll period can be traced back to the Book of Thoth.
People are talking about the Age of Aquarius, which is an ancient Egyptian tradition, this tradition of Thoth. This was something that was absolutely central to the 60s popular culture.
But in a further twist, the New Age explorers were happy to take ideas from several different versions of the Book of Thoth. From Crowley's version of Thoth, they took drugs and free love. From the Greek version, the Corpus Hermeticum, they took the idea of a purer, more spiritual age.
I believe the enduring attraction of the figure of the god Thoth, the philosophy associated with him, the ideas, is that it is this intuitive sense we have that life is deeper and more complex and stranger than what the official accounts tell us, whether that be science or the church. There are some very inspiring passages in the Corpus Hermeticum. Grow to immeasurable size, be free from every body, transcend all time, suppose nothing to be impossible for yourself. Consider yourself immortal and able to understand everything. Now, what strikes me as wonderful about that passage and many others in the Corpus Hermeticum is that it's showing us the potential of our own consciousness. It's showing us the potential of our own minds and spirits.
The meaning of what had once been the Egyptian Book of Thoth was now utterly confused. There were now 4 possible versions of Thoth's book and its magic. The ancient Greek version, the Corpus Hermeticum, translated into Latin and taken up by the Renaissance. Aliette's 18th century version, a pack of tarot cards claiming to authentically represent the Egyptian hieroglyphic text. Crowley's sexually licentious version, a deck of tarot cards coming, it was said, in a message from Thoth. And a 1960s version which mixed several of the earlier versions and came up with something different yet again. Four versions, all wildly different, all claiming to represent the authentic Egyptian Book of Thoth. But how could one book cover such widely differing interpretations? Do any of them, in fact, represent the original? Recent discoveries mean that today, for the first time, it may be possible to uncover the real truth about the Book of Thoth. For over 100 years, archaeological digs have been uncovering the mysteries of Egyptian civilization. Among them are thousands of texts written on pieces of papyri. If there is a real Book of Thoth, this would be the place to find it. But the papyri haven't given up their secrets easily. They're written in two different Egyptian scripts, some in hieroglyphics, some in a variation known as Demotic. For centuries, no one could read either script. They were only finally cracked in the mid-1800s, with the help of one of the most extraordinary objects ever found. It's called the Rosetta Stone. It had the same decree written in 3 different scripts: hieroglyphics, Demotic, and Ancient Greek.
Before the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, people didn't know how to approach hieroglyphs. Essentially, they were just little pictures, and so people would try and describe what they see, treat them as symbols. In other words, the bird is in the house with the man, etc., etc. This didn't really bear much relevance to what the Egyptians were actually trying to say. The Rosetta Stone changed all of that. The Greek section could be translated. The hieroglyphic and the demotic sections said the same thing. So scholars could work back from the Greek and work out what the hieroglyphs were saying. That cracked the code entirely.
Thanks to the Rosetta Stone, scholars are now able, little by little, to work their way through thousands of fragments of papyri. It's produced some intriguing results. As the fragments have been assembled and translated, Egyptologists have found explicit references to a Book of Thoth. There are also references to magic. But it's not magic as we usually understand it.
People thought that it is a miracle that the moon doesn't fall down to the earth or even the sun, that there's a change of day and night.
So the magic of the Book of Thoth doesn't help you read the future. It's simply a way of understanding the world.
Magic is a way that we can make sense of the unseen world. So things like the seasons rolling, day turning to night and back to day again, illnesses as well, all of these things that you can't really pinpoint a cause for.
You could be alive one day and dead the other. And that explains that people were really looking for help in every area they could get it. And that's why magic was so incredibly important to them.
There are also references in the papyri to spells. But again, these are not spells as we normally understand them. They are not magic. A spell catalogued by Egyptologists as Spell 15 reads,
"May he grant that I see the sun disk and behold the moon unceasing every day."
Spell 31 deals with a common menace.
"Get back. Retreat. Get back, you crocodile. Do not come against me, for I live by my magic."
So these are not spells designed to perform extraordinary deeds. They're more like prayers.
The word spell doesn't really help the issue because this is very much our terminology being imposed over the ancient Egyptian literature itself.
So does this mean all the later interpretations of the Book of Thoth that see magic, supernatural powers in it, are simply misguided? Gradually, it's becoming clearer what the Book of Thoth is, and what it isn't. There are references to man being halfway to a god, as the Renaissance believed. And there are references to the Masonic ritual of death and rebirth. These clues suggest the Greek Corpus Hermeticum did contain some of the original Egyptian thinking. But there are no references in any of the papyri to tarot or images of the tarot cards. There are no references to Crowley's notion of free will or his promotion of sexual promiscuity. And there is nothing about the rituals of New Age mysticism. All these are complete fabrications. But there is something else in the papyri that's much more significant. Today, scholars question whether the Book of Thoth ever existed as a physical object.
Despite the mentions that we have, we're not convinced there's actually a Book of Thoth that we can one day find. Essentially, the references to a Book of Thoth or the Book of Thoth seem to be metaphors for the collection in its entirety of ancient Egyptian religious literature.
There are various compilations of magical knowledge written down in different periods, and to those believers of that period, that was the real Book of Thoth. But when we put them all together, they are all so different that there was not one central tradition. The Book of Thoth never existed.
So does that mean the legend of Thoth and his magic book will disappear? It seems unlikely. In 2002, a BBC poll named Crowley the 73rd most influential Briton ever. And a new generation is adding to the legends of ancient Egypt. New films and video games draw on ancient Egypt. And even if there is no Book of Thoth, that won't stop a new generation believing in it. The 5,000-year-old legend of Thoth and his magic is still a force to be conjured with.
There are secret societies, even today, who still hold Thoth to be the archetypal mystagogue, the person, the god, who will lead you into the arcane mysteries of consciousness.
It's very, very strange, but Thoth seems to have something to say to every century. He became a central figure for people who believe there is more in this world than can be explained by science.